9. Race matters. Who created it? Long live James Baldwin.
You know, one of the missions that I've had since I started making work was to offer to ourselves, to each other, how rich we are without anybody else's interference. Just to demonstrate in our everyday how rich and creative and funny and beautiful that we are.
Welcome to Black Manifesto, the 10 Commandments. Black Women Speak Out, a podcast series hosted by Nora, Chipaumire and myself, Pawlet Brookes. Black Manifesto brings together voices of Black women from around the world as a collaborative conversation, making the invisible visible and addressing how we work to reshape a new world in which Black women are seen and heard. The guests on this podcast share their reflections unapologetically, so please be aware of the use of strong language and reference to personal struggles and traumas. In this episode, Cynthia Oliver offers reflections on race, identity, activism and Black womanhood in the 9th commandment. Race matters. Remember who created it. Long live James Baldwin! So let's start easy. Does race matter?
I'm sorry, I had to start with a laugh because it's like, easy? I think maybe you started with the hardest question. I wish I could say it didn't matter, especially now. But it does. And as a student of humanity, of performance and culture, it's been the elephant in the room so often. But so few are willing to address it. We can't fix it unless we see it, acknowledge it, work to change it. Scholars have determined that it's a construct, right? So on some level, the genetic, for example, it isn't real. But we create constructs every day and they become real. And race became real a long time ago when economics drove folks to divide and conquer. Race became real when humans decided some folks would have and others wouldn't, for greed of things and of power. Race became real when we decided some people were better than others, and in order to determine who more easily, we'd create classifications. I remember when I was working on my dissertation, I did a lot of study around Sandra Gilman's work. And he had done these studies in France in the early 19th century where we created ideas around biological determinism. They were trying to figure out who was the prostitute and who was the criminal. And so they decided there were certain kinds of measurements and features that would easily classify somebody as one of these predisposed to this certain kind of behaviors, which was absurd. But that's how folks would be divided. Race became a reality when we decided who was human and who was not, to justify enslaving folks, who is intelligent and who's not. And as much as these ideas get debunked, there's that repetition that, it returns. It's like a boomerang. I remember in the 1990s, there was this study on the bell curve. And that was the repeat of another study from the 60s and 70s. And, they get shot down again. And supposedly intelligent, intellectual, scholarly folks come back and repeat. Folks want to insist on their own capacity to be better than somebody else. And in order to do so, since they can't compete fairly, they do all they can to give themselves an unfair advantage. And so, race and a racialized experience is also about shared experience, right? So some of us who are disenfranchised because of it, and that experience brings us together in some ways. And so, the other side of that is that, for example, Black people across the globe acknowledge each other, because of a shared experience of subjugation. So while it's a common thing, it's an unfortunate thing, but it also has done another thing to kind of create certain kinds of communities out of the unfortunate circumstances of race. We've also created some amazing and wondrous communities. And I think about Blackness, like global Blackness, as a kind of community one of the ways in which that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this some more, but, the nod. The nod is a global acknowledgement of our shared experience. And I love the nod. Wherever I go in the world, there's the nod,
So how do you take that nod and use that nod as a movement with text? So the relationship between text and movement. So you've got the nod,
Yes.
but then the nod is a movement. And the nod is something that how do you take that and twist it with your text? Because that's the thing that you do.
Yes, I love that stuff. I love the materiality of Blackness, right? I love the physical experience of being a Black person in the world. And so, like, I grew up in the Caribbean, in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, and I was a keen observer of our cultural practice. My folks cracked me up. For example, close to home, my grandmother always did this thing where she smacked her hands together. She would smack her hands together in this gesture, whether she was happy, whether she was laughing at something, whether she was worried about something, whether she was making a point about something. The quality of that hand slapping in this particular way told you a lot, told you more than the words did. So in a couple of my pieces, I would do this hand slap, and the hand slap would appear in different moments depending on what was being communicated to the audience. So it could be a funny moment, or it could be a worrisome moment, or it could be a cosdong. I mean, it could be all kinds of things. And so I love those kind of commonalities, and I use them in the work.
So what's some of the most impactful texts that you carry with you that sits alongside that movement?
Well, it depends on the work. Like the work that I did around Calypso, I kind of lifted texts from the women around me. That was an international crew of people who came with their own stories. And that was a very different kind of work for me, because usually I had generated the stories. Prior to that moment, I had generated all of the language around the pieces. But this one, I drew from all these women from different island nations. And what I would do is I would sit in the room and eavesdrop on their conversations with each other, mostly during breaks, because during breaks is when the nonsense would happen. And so I would sit there and I would watch and listen, and I would pull from those conversations and the gestures that were happening, and we would incorporate those. I mean, I would, of course, tell them that I had been watching them, and I would ask their permission. I wouldn't just kind of rip them off. So it varies. And then there was a piece of mine in 2000 that I did called Shimad. And in that work, we were looking at the way women's power gets kind of disempowered by considering them mad or crazy, hysterical, that kind of classic language around womanhood. And instead, we flipped the script. But we used it in a number of different ways. For example, there's a section of that work where Retta Aliong, who's from Trinidad, and I kind of make a play on the language that kids might use teasingly in school. And, that's from that bad man, bad woman kind of language that you have to toughen up about. So we go through this whole series and do an accumulation. She mad. She mad, she bad. She mad, she bad, she mean. She mad, she bad, she mean, she clean. She mad, she bad, she mean, she clean, she dip. She whip. She good. She could. She mad, she bad, she mean, she clean, she dip, she wish, she good, she could. She wish. And so we would do each of those utterances with a different gesture, and they would build. And that's how I built a certain language that was both vocal and physical in the piece.
And in your piece, Unremovable Jacket, you decided to explore race, language, and the language of fashion through dance theatre. Just talk to us a little bit more about the themes and how you pull them together, because we're beginning to get a taste of how you've taken language, taken movement, and it is that musicality and the people that you're talking about, that the whole thing sort of blends together. Just talk to us a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, sure. It's complicated for me. I mean, one of the reasons why I started making work in New York, and I was a reluctant maker, was because I didn't see enough of us in the environment that I was in. I was dancing with people who were doing exciting experimental work, But we had so much to contribute that I didn't see around me. And I was invited to do a short piece, and then one of the producers in New York said, I think you should do an evening length work. And I avoided that man for like a year after that. And then finally I decided, okay, I'm going to jump into this. And so Unremovable Jacket was my second work. The first one dealt with death and the AIDS crisis and loss across the board. And then Unremovable Jacket, I started to pull back a little bit and look at, why was there this dearth of Black artists doing this kind of work in the field? And what were the things that kind of held us back or kept us in certain kinds of boxes? The kind of tokenism around it, so that there could only be one person of color on a season or something like that. And so, having conversations with your peers, at the time I was in the world of fashion. I was a model so that I could pay my rent and so that I could eat. I modeled on the runway. I sat for artists, visual artists. I did a number of things in that arena. And so I saw the ways in which certain kinds of stereotypes kind of followed us in every room or preceded us in every room, and started looking at how the language was used to describe us, to ascribe us, to keep us in a certain arena, to limit our movement, our behavior. And so we were always somehow exceeding that. And I wanted to express that in that particular work. So it was a trio of women. There was myself, a white woman, and a woman who appeared to be mixed race. And we talked about our subjective experience in that.
So moving on from that, and just sort of touching back a little bit more on Blackness in the mainstream, why is it vital to offer a more nuanced perspective on Blackness? Because you've just described three women: Black, dual heritage, mixed race, white, or potentially dual heritage, mixed race. Why is it important when you look at that to, look at those subtleties around Blackness?
Well, it's important because we're so much more than that. And the woman who was mixed race, she was more than dual. And so I didn't allow her, and she didn't want to kind of identify exactly what all of the strains of ethnicities she was a part of. And I loved keeping her identity really nebulous, so that the audience was always kind of unstable about, I don't know exactly what she is. Is she Native? Is she white? Is she Black? Is she, she was delicious is what she was. And we all were mixed, but I made certain categories so that the audience could identify what it is that we do to each other and then kind of move together from there. So for me, it was important to say that, and for people to see that we are more. We get so reduced by whiteness and by bias and by shit every day that discounts our brilliance and our creativity and our defiance and our triumphs and our innovative energies. And so I think we need to be reminded that we are so much more.
So in being reminded that we're so much more, just representation, talk to us about why you think it matters in Black expressive arts.
One of the missions that I've had since I started making work was to offer to ourselves, to each other, how rich we are without anybody else's interference. Just to demonstrate in our everyday how rich and creative and funny and beautiful that we are. And so all of my work pulls in the quotidian. It pulls in the stuff we do every day. But like I said, the thing about my grandmother's hands and her gesture, the chups, the eye roll, the neck thing, the attitude, all of that stuff is so rich in terms of movement and expression that it has to be reflected back, so that we laugh at ourselves, so that we see the joy that we bring to each other despite the conditions in which we live and what we create. We are innovators in every generation that we manage to live on this this plane, we have innovated and folks have been amazed by us, whether or not they say it.
So, as an innovator, as an artist, how do you redefine and reclaim Black female subjectivity?
Well, I don't think I need to redefine it or reclaim it. It is, I'm getting emotional about it. It will always be. I want to inhabit it is what I want. I want to inhabit it. I want to inhabit it fully. I feel like I've inherited some rather big shoes, and I owe it to those who came before me to do my damnedest to fill them and to offer a leg up to the sisters behind me to do the same. So, there are those folks who say that our job is to leave this place better than we found it. And I agree with that 100%. To offer more to the next, to create beauty where we can, hope when it seems like there might be no room for any.
So, talk to me then about the decolonization of language, because we're going to offer more, we're going to leave more, just trailblaze with a new vocabulary. Talk to me about the decolonization of language and why it is important.
Paulette, I think we already do that. Black people already decolonize language. We turn that shit around in a second. We re-articulate it for our own use. Folks talk about Black English not being English. It is English to us. We understand it. If you have a problem with it, maybe what was being said was not necessarily being said for you. So, I think that there is that, of course, there is that the necessity to communicate with others so that we can operate in the world. Yes, we all need to have that ability. We need to be multilingual in certain senses. And some people resist that for various reasons, and that is their prerogative. But I think Black speech is always decolonized speech.
I totally agree with you, actually. But however, how would you describe Black womanhood now, today? Not Black womanhood of the 70s, not the 80s, where we had, the whole blaxploitation and Pam Grier as a Black woman that we looked at. How would you describe Black womanhood today?
As one of the best things the divine has ever made.
I can't ask you anything more on that one. Because it's wrong. No.
Could I say any more? Okay, I can say one more thing.
Yes.
Badass.
Fantastic. So, given that Black womanhood is badass, the best thing ever, at what point do you feel you're most powerful?
Wow. I feel that on stage. I feel that, I'm going to say multiple places, right? I feel that on stage. I feel that as a mother. I'm also, brought to my knees as a mother. That's the thing that motherhood can do for you. It can make you, it can make you feel exalted on the one hand and then like a sniveling, crying fool on the other. I feel like it when I present the best that I can of my work to my people.
So when it comes to your pieces and you're presenting the best that you can to your people, why is humor important within that?
Because I need it. We need it daily. I feel like it helps us manage the pain. It eases the way for pleasure, and we deserve pleasure. We deserve pleasure just as much as the next person. And so, for me, it also eases the way for folks to absorb difficulty, difficult subject matter, difficult ideas you might not even agree with, other perspectives. Humor helps us, humor kind of oils the machinery so that we can process difficult material more easily. And I want to offer that to us. I feel like we deserve it. We deserve a laugh. We deserve a gut laugh.
So we're there with that belly laugh. We're there with our humor. We're there as the most powerful. So what does recognition look like for you?
That's where I come back to the earlier part. The recognition looks like the nod, the look in the eye, the the chups, the dap, that thing Caribbean women and men do when they they purse and point their lips in a certain direction.
Yeah, push up.
That's what it's called. I never knew the term.
It's when you push up. My uncle would describe a Caribbean woman walking. She walk and she a roll. She walk and she a roll, because it's that musicality that I was talking about again within the body. Look how she walk and she a roll, and and your face, it'd be push up. Your face push up. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to use your hands.
No, we know it. It's all in the face. All in the face. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, all of these things, all of this and more. I mean, I have a dear friend, scholar, who I revere highly, who used to make me laugh so hard. And I would say, what is it with you and this ignorance? And he said to me, just the way I practice my scholarship, I got to practice my ignorance. And I love that. And it's true. I mean, and that's, the tradition of the bad man, the storyteller, the bad woman, in the Caribbean in particular, it's practice. You got to practice. Rappers practice every day. You hear the brothers on the corner practice spitting their rhymes, you got to practice.
You got to practice to be the bad man. You got to practice your rhymes. You got to practice all of that. But then we also have to grapple with racial prejudice, civil rights and activism, policing. What is your interpretation of these three provocations?
That too takes practice, and practice at every level. It's a heavy lift. And I think, I'll come back to my grandmother and the way that she used to run her household. We need every hand. So we need everyone in every category to do what they do as best they can. To think historically, yes, we need the Fannie Lou Hamers who cooked for everybody, as much as she, took care of the farming. We need the Malcolms and the Martins and the Medgars. We need the James Browns and the Arethas as much as we need the Angelas and the Elaines and the Afenis. We need the poets, the playwrights, the dancers, the painters, the writer, the scholars, the scientists. We need everybody to his ability. And we all need to practice. We need to practice caring for each other on a daily basis. And that will attune us to a kind of activism that doesn't require heroics or the perception of heroics, but a daily conscious caring for one another that can then move us forward toward justice.
Okay, then finally, as it's become a tradition with Black Manifesto, what is the life lesson that you want to share with others? Wow.
I got to choose one?
We can have them all.
Well, as I get ready to leave my 50s, hard to believe, I don't know how it came this fast, I'm learning to stand in my own 2 feet and do me. There's this t-shirt on Instagram that I've been looking, I haven't bought it yet, but I've been looking at it that says, quote, "I am not for everybody," end quote. And that's true. And I'm at a place where everyone doesn't have to love what I do, who I am, but there are those for whom this message, what I do, resonates. And so that is for them. There are others for other people. So we're all here to do some work. And so I guess my lesson is that we need to get to that work and leave the rest of this nonsense right where it is. I think that's what happens when you realize that there's more time behind you than in front of you. It's like, I don't have time for this nonsense. Let's just cut to the chase. One of my favorite poems is by Lucille Clifton. It's "Won't You Celebrate With Me?" Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up, here, on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. That is my motto right now. That is the piece I look to daily to give me the energy, fortitude, conviction to do what I do.
That was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. You can read more about Black Manifesto in Black Ink, a new publication from Serendipity, which brings together international voices from Africa and the African Caribbean diaspora and Indigenous communities to discuss Black arts, heritage and cultural politics. In the next episode and final episode of Black Manifesto, we'll be exploring the next commandment. Read, will ya? Educate your darn self. The Black Manifesto podcast is sponsored by the National Education Union. This podcast was edited by Hannah Hethman and Julia Letts at Better Lemon Creative Audio, with research from Miss Thora Allison and Amy Grain. For more information and content to support your own learning, visit our Resources for Change pages at serendipity-uk.com. Thank you.